So these Nkisi Nkondi have to do with the practice of divination and sacred medicine in amongst Congo people, and they are used for they're containers really. They can hold a spiritually charged substance, and you see little containers here protruding from these figures, and they're used for all sorts of reasons, for healing, success in hunting or trade, business. Um, and Inkisi is loosely translated as spirit, yet it is represented as a container of sacred substances which are then activated by supernatural forces that can be summoned into a physical world. And these sacred substances might be different herbs, different medicine, really, that's prescribed by a practitioner. And they often also include, and we can see in these three different examples here, this accumulation of pegs, blades, nails, other sharp objects that are inserted into the surface. And Europeans who encountered these objects, of course, looked at these objects and said, well, these are fetish objects, and missionaries typically confiscated Nkisi Nkondi. They were destroyed as evidence of sorcery, but these are really, we should think about them as another medicinal practice that is similar to any other healing practices that people use today. The Cuba live in the Democratic Republic of Congo on in the equatorial forest, and let me see, they are, the Cuba, they're made up of different ethnic groups, but they all acknowledge the leadership of the same person. And here we're looking at a portrait of one of the Cuba kings, or the Nyim, Nyim. He was the Cuba king Misha Mishiang Mambul was celebrated throughout his kingdom for his generosity, great number of loyal subjects, and he commissioned this idealized portrait statue called an ndap that we see here today. The ndap is the most revered of all Cuba art forms, and this translates simply to statue. We see it's a figurative wood sculpture that portrays, it's mainly used to portray important Cuba leaders, and the ndap model was used from the 18th to 20th centuries, and we see these very rounded contours, kind of some defined features here, like the collarbone, for example, the chest muscles, but they're not naturalistic portraits, and nor are they carved from direct observation. Instead, these are cultural conventions and visual precedents that guide the artist in making this sculpture. And all the ndap figures are sculpted using a 1:3 proportion. So the head is about 1/3 the size of the total statue. The head is the most important body part for the Cuba. It's the seat of intelligence. It is the valued ideal. Okay, we're staying in Central Africa here, and we are looking at a reliquary figure from the Kota, the Mbulu Ngulu. And this is a tradition that develops from the need to conserve the remains of the dead in portable reliquaries rather than burying them in the ground where they might become separated from their living descendants if they move. So the bones of the dead were believed to retain spiritual power and were kept in baskets or bark receptacles. And then on top of those receptacles, there was a reliquary or a kind of guardian figure called an Mbulu Ngulu that protects the remains of the dead from spiritual or physical harm. These reliquaries were never kept in the home, but in shrines outside of the village, and they could be visited by descendants or by community leaders, for example, seeking guidance. And again, we see a non-naturalistic approach to the human form. These are not meant to represent a human being, but rather the spirit of a guardian force. So we see this kind of simplified face. Usually the Mbulu Ngulus are carved in wood and then covered in sheet metal, and the bodies are typically diminished and very abstracted. All right, we're going to kind of shift here to more contemporary works, and we're starting with a South African artist named William Kentridge. And here I'm showing you a still from a longer animation that Kentridge made from large-scale drawings in charcoal and pastel on paper. His work is fascinating, and I put a link to Felix in Exile on the list for the Module 3 readings and resources, and I really encourage you to view the entire film. I think it's something like 7 or 8 minutes. And so what happens is he creates different drawings which contain a single scene, and he successively alters these drawings through erasing and redrawing to create these animations. And it's, I think, a kind of metaphor for the layering of memory, how memory is full of places that get erased, embellishments that we add later. Memory is very slippery, and this is one of Kentridge's principal themes. So in Felix in Exile, this is 40 drawings where we meet Nandi, an African woman who appears at the beginning of the film, and she's making landscape drawings, and she's watching these African bodies appear on the land with bleeding wounds that then melt into the landscape. Now keep in mind, this is 1994. This is the apartheid had only recently been abolished. This institutionalized racism and caste society in South Africa had recently been abolished, and the memory of apartheid was already getting rewritten. White South Africans were attempting to give kind of different perspectives and suppress the voices of Black South Africans who had won their hard-fought freedom. And so we see, I think, this, so Nandi, she's trying to record this evidence of violence and massacre that's part of South Africa's recent history, but it's slippery. It's kind of disappearing and reappearing. And the Felix, who is mentioned in the title here, he is the kind of, he's a figure who appears in other Kentridge films as this humane and loving alter ego to the ruthless capitalist white South African psyche. And so again, there's a few different things that Kentridge is trying to do here at the same time. He said, Felix in Exile was made just before the first free and open general election in South Africa, and he wanted people to memorialize the dead. He wanted people to think about how this violent, painful history is becoming part of South African life and landscape in the form of a kind of hand-drawn animation. My slides are out of order. Okay, I think that means that I'm going to stop the video and regroup here, and then we'll come back with some more contemporary works for the final video of this module.